Thank you. Thank you. Hello, Los Angeles. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. As many of you know, I'm at home on this stage. And I'm at home in Los Angeles, and it's just wonderful to be here with all of you. I want to thank you, Reverend Coco. Thank you, Marianne Lewis and Jennifer John. How inspiring to all Agape. Thank you so much for having me back. I'm so grateful. Thank you. You might have been hearing recently about some things I've been doing over the last few months. I want to tell you a little bit about a story that I feel in many ways has been my own. It was a story I once heard about the Good Samaritan, but I think of it as a story about how the Good Samaritan became a conscious Samaritan. So the Good Samaritan is walking down the road, and the Good Samaritan sees a beggar, and the Good Samaritan gives the beggar some alms. And then the Good Samaritan continues down the road and sees another beggar. Being a Good Samaritan, the Good Samaritan gives the beggar some alms. And then the Good Samaritan continues further down the road and sees another beggar. And being a Good Samaritan, the Good Samaritan gives the beggar some alms. Continues down the road, sees another beggar, gives them alms. Continues down the road, sees another beggar and gives the beggar some alms. But at a certain point, the Good Samaritan says to himself, "Why are there so many beggars?" And that has been the story of my career for many years. Because I started doing what I do in 1983 and early 80s, 35 years ago. And anybody who does the kind of work I do, anything spiritual, psychotherapeutic, life coaching, anything like that, we understand. We understand that there are difficult phases of life, that things happen. That's why we do what we do, to be of service to people who are going through hard times, people who need help, and people who need crisis. And I understand that some of those things are normal. I understand that things happen. I understand people die, people get sick, people lose their businesses, people go bankrupt, people get divorced. All kinds of things happen that are simply a part of life. But what I have found in the last 20 years is that too many people in this country, the richest country in the world, are going through crises that are unnecessary. And so myself, having been very involved in the AIDS crisis, having been very involved at the same time that the culture was really exploding with this consciousness of holistic integrative medicine, understanding that when you have a problem in your body, it's very old-fashioned now to approach that just in an allopathic way. You don't just wait till you get sick and then seek to eradicate or suppress the symptoms. You know, you have to look not just at the symptoms, but at cause. You have to look at what causes these symptoms. You know you have to deal on the level of cause in order to prevent symptoms. And then even if symptoms arise, there's more to healing those symptoms than simply working with them on the external levels. There are psychological issues involved here. There are emotional issues involved here. And there are spiritual issues involved here. And as all of us know, any pattern in nature mimics itself on every level. So not only does a holistic and integrative approach heal the body, a holistic and integrative approach heals a society, heals a civilization. And it is time for us to take an integrative approach to healing America. And so I asked myself, what are the psychological things that we have to look at? What are the emotional places we have to go to? And what are the spiritual places within ourselves that we have to dig deep down into in order to transform all that suffering? First of all that psychological, like where did all this stuff come from? How did this happen? And it's not that hard once you put it all together. It all started about 40 years ago. This economic theory was proffered to us. It was called trickle-down economics. And this system of economics has embedded itself, not only in our financial institutions, it has corrupted our government, and it has hijacked our value system in this country. Now, before that, I'm not saying everything was perfect, but when I was growing up, the U.S. corporation was expected to care. The U.S. corporation was expected to care about something more than its fiduciary responsibility to its stockholders. It was expected to realize that there are more stakeholders than just stockholders. The stakeholders are the entire community. The stakeholders are the workers. The stakeholders are the environment. In fact, everybody in America, in a way, is a stakeholder in what happens in corporate America. This influences us. This affects our lives. And yet, even though prior to this trickle-down economic theory, the corporation was expected. Somebody works for that corporation, They worked there for decades, and the corporation was expected to care whether or not that person had a dignified retirement. But once trickle-down economics took hold, no. All that the corporation was expected to do was to have fiduciary responsibility to its own stockholders. Now, what do you call a person who just doesn't care? What do you call a person who has no sense of morals or ethics, who has no sense of moral responsibility to anyone but themselves? What do we call that person? What did that person say? Oh, honey, he is so just the symptom. You call that person a sociopath. And what do you call an economic system that does not care? What do you call an economic system that has no sense of moral or ethical responsibility to anything other than its own short-term profits and bottom line? You call it a sociopathic economic system. And a sociopathic economic system that has hijacked the moral values of this country, a sociopathic economic system that has corrupted the government of this country, has become, for the people of this country, an oppressive force. We have a tyrannous economic system. It is time for a revolution of consciousness. Now, we know about revolution in this country because we were born of one. In 1776, some very, very brave men signed the Declaration of Independence. And with that Declaration of Independence, they established America's mission statement. And with the establishment of that mission statement, they repudiated a social and economic system that had prevailed within Europe for centuries. And that was called aristocracy. And in an aristocracy, in a monarchy, the idea is that there's a king or a queen and there are few rich friends. And those few rich friends, the upper classes, the aristocracy, they are entitled to everything. They are entitled to the land, and they were entitled to education, and they were entitled to wealth. They were entitled to wealth creation. They were entitled to all of the material means by which to actualize their dreams. And nobody else was. Everybody else was little more than a serf. It's not a slave, but neither is it a free person. And so what happened in 1776 is that we repudiated aristocracy. And these men signed this Declaration of Independence, instead saying all men are created equal. And God gave all men the unalienable rights of life and of liberty and of the pursuit of happiness. And that governments are established to secure those rights. Now, they were risking their lives to sign that declaration because if the British had won the war, those men would have been hanged. They would have been executed as traitors. Now, with the signing of that declaration, they repudiated an aristocracy. What has happened in our country is that we have reverted to an aristocratic situation, and it is time to repudiate it again. Now, when those men signed the Declaration of Independence, that's how it all started. But that's also where it got very gnarly, because 41 of the signers of the Declaration of Independence were themselves slave owners. America has always been both. That is baked into the cake. It is our characterological DNA, that polarity. On one hand, we are based on the most aspirational, the most enlightened, the most illumined principles that have ever formed the founding of a nation. And at the same time, from the very, very beginning, we have at times been the most violent perpetrators of transgression against those principles. Now, that is an ongoing story, and every generation writes its chapter. But every generation from the beginning has embodied within itself both forces, both those of us who are absolutely in love, ablaze with the idea of what it could mean to say, everybody gets a chance. Everybody gets a chance to soar. Everybody gets a chance to self-actualize. Everybody gets a chance to manifest their God-given potential according to their own work. That is an extraordinary idea. It's a radical idea. It was radical in 1776, and it's radical today. And that possibility is not just a right that is given to us. It is also a responsibility that is given to us generation after generation to take care of, to nurture, to stand for, and bequeath to our children. Now, what happens in every generation is that that generation decides which side are we going to be on. So what happened in this society, in this country? We had slavery, but a generation rose up and it abolished slavery. And we had the suppression of women. And we've had generations rise up with two major waves of feminism, and a generation rise up with the women's suffrage movement giving the women right to vote. We had generations which had institutionalized white supremacy and segregation, and then we had a generation rise up, and that was the civil rights movement. We had institutionalized suppression of workers, and we had the labor movement rise up, and child labor laws and financial regulatory moves. We had the suppression of gay people, not even giving them the right to marry, and we had in our own time the marriage equality movement. So generations make a choice. Generations make a choice. Ladies and gentlemen, today, as my dad used to say, watch out, little sister, the bastards are always at the door. What's happening in our country today is no different than what has happened before. Because yes, there are many of us who are blazed with the possibilities of democracy, and there are in our time those who, simply because such possibilities are not convenient for their economic purposes, basically take the attitude as others have before them. It's what Franklin Roosevelt called the economic royalists. And they look at the sense of real justice and real mercy and real democracy and real freedom and real possibilities for all as inconvenient, and therefore they say, no, we will not be doing that. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it's our turn. This is not the first generation to have to deal with that stuff. Let's not be the first one to wimp out on doing what it takes to fix this thing. Now, this stuff gets deep because today it's not an evil institution, it's a mindset. But it is a mindset that has corrupted our government. Our government has become little more than a legalized system of bribery, and it has even hijacked our value system. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the deal. That system, when you have an aristocracy that's sitting, which in our case is the 1% of Americans who own more wealth than the bottom 90%, because that's what's happened over the last 40 years. Trickle-down economics has created the largest income inequality since 1929. It has created a situation where 40% of all Americans live with daily economic tension and anxiety in the richest country in the world. And so what happens is that the aristocracy is sitting there feasting on their table, dropping crumbs down on the floor. And this is the problem. A hungry man will crawl for crumbs. A hungry man will just beg. In fact, we're at a point where so many of us are hungry, we're actually begging for a cookie. Ladies and gentlemen, you don't beg for a cookie when you're an American. You say, we all get to feast here. And when we do that, then we have to force ourselves to open our hearts and to realize the suffering that all this has produced. Cynicism is just an excuse for not helping. And none of this, like, I'm too traumatized by the whole thing. You're too traumatized. We don't have time for you to get over your trauma work before you come to the defense of your country. And none of this using this spurious spirituality as a justification. No. There is no spiritual justification for political disengagement, not at a time like this. There is no spiritual or religious path that has ever existed that gives any of us a pass on addressing the suffering of other sentient beings. There is a difference between transcendence and denial. No. No cynicism, not at a time like this. It's just an excuse for not helping and not whining either. We need to be real men right now, and we need to be real women right now, and we can do what our ancestors have done. We can rise up and handle this thing. And when we do, we're going to have to open our hearts and understand what has happened here. We have millions of American children who go to school every single day in schools that don't even have working toilets. We have millions of American children who go to school every day in schools that don't even have school supplies adequate to teach a child to read. And if a child cannot read by the age of 8, then the chances of high school graduation are drastically decreased, and the chances of incarceration are drastically increased. We have millions of American children who go to school hungry. We have elementary school teachers who hear their children say, Mrs. Smith, I'm hungry. We have millions of American children who are experiencing, because of the violence in their communities, a form of PTSD that psychologists tell us is no less severe than the PTSD of a returning veteran from Afghanistan or Iraq. What is our political system doing about these children? Normalizing their despair. These are children who should be rescued no differently than we would rescue them were they the victims of a natural disaster. But, ladies and gentlemen, they don't vote. They're not old enough to vote, so they're not a constituency, so it is as though they are unseen. They're not old enough to work, so they don't have any financial leverage, so how are they to be able to compete for the clout of all these corporate forces whose money flood Washington every day? I'll tell you what needs to happen. The people need to step in. You know, the political establishment didn't rise up one day and say, oh, let's end slavery, shall we? No, that's not what happened. The people stepped in with the abolitionist movement. And the political establishment did not wake up one day and say, oh, let's give women the right to vote, shall we? No, that's not what happened. The people stepped in with the women's suffragette movement. And the political establishment didn't wake up one day and say, oh, let's desegregate the American South. That's not what happened. The civil rights movement rose up because the people stepped in. It is time again for the people to step in. So look, the founders of this country did not give the power to a political establishment. The founders of this country gave the power to the people. And we have forgotten that it is ours. We have been disempowered through a kind of distraction. You know, when you look at those principles in America's mission statement, when you look at the principles in the Declaration of Independence, they have to be revisited. They have to be embraced generation after generation. If all they are written on marble walls somewhere, if all they are is printed on parchment, and then they're behind glass, and 8th graders go to visit them in Washington, D.C., if that's all they are, they lose their emotional force. They lose their moral authority. We have to psychologically and emotionally bond with those principles, or else we become too easy to fool. We become too easy to play. We become too easy to distract. And that means we need to move into the spiritual power, not only to psychologically understand what's going on here, not only emotionally to feel what is going on here, to feel what is happening to these children, to feel what is happening to the earth. When you say short-term profits for gun manufacturers are why we don't have common sense gun laws, and the short-term profits for health insurance companies and big pharma is why we don't have universal health care, and short-term profits for fossil fuel companies is why we're not addressing the greatest moral challenge of our generation. We have 12 years to even save this planet. And the fact that we are only concerned about short-term profits for defense contractors is why we have an agenda for endless war. We have no agenda for peace. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a corporate matrix that has become a new American aristocracy. We need to do more than just make life better for the serfs. We need to dissolve the aristocracy. This is America, and we don't have one here. This is LA, we know. This is California, we know all about holistic healing, and we know that Western medicine is very, very good with acute illness, and we appreciate that. And we know that as a country, we have to talk about health care. We certainly need a universal health care. We need a Medicare for all. We get that every other country has that has anywhere near our power. But we need to go deeper than that, ladies and gentlemen. Our health care system in this country is a sickness care system. We need to do more than ask how we're going to pay for our health care. We need to ask, how come so many of us are sick? Why is there so much chronic illness in this country at such higher rates than in other countries? Well, to do that, we're going to have to deal with the aristocracy, because we're going to have to deal with the fact that the chemical companies and the agribusiness companies and the fossil fuel companies and the food companies and even the economic policies of this country, not only are carcinogens spewed, not only are pesticides allowed that should not be allowed, not only are toxins spewed that should not be allowed, but the economic policies of this country themselves, unjust as they are, aristocratic policies as they are, advocating more for the possibility that very rich people can get richer and everybody else has a harder time even surviving, that creates stress that is at the bottom making us sick. We have to stand up. We have to stand up for our bodies, we have to stand up for our earth, and we have to stand up for our children's children. We have to stand up for our country. I'm not telling you anything you didn't already know. That's been true of my whole career. I never say anything everybody I know isn't saying. I just have a habit of saying when the microphone's on. And that's what we need to do in the United States today. And there's something else we all know and we need to voice. And that is that we have no agenda for creating peace. We only have an agenda for eternal preparation for war. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you can't just take medicine, you have to cultivate health. You can't just prepare for war, you have to wage peace. And how do you wage peace? Well, there are specific peace-building skills, just like there are skills of the military. I see the military like a surgeon. If you need to have surgery, then obviously you want to have the best surgeon. But you also, being a sane person, want to avoid surgery at all costs. The criticism of the military-industrial complex is not a criticism of the military. It is a criticism of the political factors, the defense contracting, the huge military-industrial complex that bases our entire national security agenda on so many hundreds of billions of dollars more than what is needed for legitimate security. And not only is so much more spent on preparation for war than on preparation for peace, money is consistently taken away from the actual peace-building community. How do you build peace? I'll tell you how you build it. You build it with diplomacy, you build it with mediation, you build it with development. And there are 4 factors, when they are present, are statistically proven to increase the incidence of peace and to decrease the incidence of violence. Expand economic opportunities for women, and you'll have more peace. Expand educational opportunities for children, and you'll have more peace. Reduce violence against women, and you'll have more peace. Ameliorate unnecessary human suffering wherever possible, and you'll have more peace. Ladies and gentlemen, desperate people do desperate things. Desperate people are more vulnerable to ideological capture by genuinely psychotic forces anywhere, in a corner of a city of the United States or anywhere else in the world. We should see desperate people as a national security risk. It turns out love really is the answer. But that's not what we do today, ladies and gentlemen, and there's no point looking to the political establishment to do any more than to make incremental changes, because our traditional political establishment is divided into 2 categories. One is a group of people who actually think an aristocracy is basically a good idea. They're what Franklin Roosevelt called the economic royalists. But too many within the other political establishment do everything they possibly can, because they really do feel bad. And they do everything they can to ameliorate the suffering on the periphery. They'll do everything they can to make life better for the serfs. No. We need to name and to challenge the underlying forces that make all that suffering inevitable. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time. The people need to step in now. But what are the spiritual forces that we need to find in order to do that? Why have we been willing to go along as we have? Why have we been willing even to subconsciously conspire? How has it been so easy to disconnect the dots in our brains? How has it been so easy to fool us? How has it been so easy to distract us? Well, in a way, it doesn't matter, because we're not distracted now. There has been an awakening. We need to recognize Donald Trump is just an opportunistic infection. He could never have taken hold of this country had it not been for a very weakened societal immune system, and all of us have something to look at in ourselves. And now the immune cells are awakened. Gandhi said that the leader of the Indian independence movement was the small, still voice within. Each and every one of us rise up now. Each and every one of us have to do what we're told to do. Some of us are told to work in education. Some of us are told to work with the hungry. Some of us are told to work with sciences. Some of us are told to work with business. We must all collectively work together on politics. Because what has happened in politics is that fear has been harnessed for political purposes. And you can't fight dog whistles, you have to drown them out. And you drown them out with angel voices. But Abraham Lincoln, when he talked about the angels of our better nature, he didn't think he was being metaphorical. That was before the advent of modern psychology. In those days, if you talked about what we would define as racism, bigotry, anti-Semitism, homophobia, etc., you know what people then would have said? Oh, you mean demons. And if you had said to them, well, but then there's mercy and compassion and forgiveness and love and justice and brotherhood, they would have said, yes, that's angels. And so the idea of harnessing love for political purposes is not new. That's what Gandhi did. That's what King did. And those were the two most successful and nonviolent political movements in the 20th century. Those who say love is weak, those who say it's naive to think that our capacity to love each other, to love those children, to love the earth, to love people in the world, to not want people anywhere in the world to be hurt directly or indirectly by American foreign policy. For us to stand for love, the love that will save the world is not just love for our own children. The love that will save the world is love also for the children on the other side of town and the other side of the world. Love means that it's not okay for us that $350 billion in arms sales is used as an excuse for the United States to give aerial support to a genocidal war, which is starving people in Yemen, by which Saudi Arabia is starving people, tens of thousands of them, many of which are children. Our great-grandparents would be rolling over in their graves, and all they want for us to do is to rise up. They can't rise up. It's our turn now. And if we do that and we stand for love, then when people say to us, oh, you're so naive to think that if we just love each other enough, that somehow that will save the world. Let me tell you something. What's naive is to think that if we do not learn to love each other more, that we will even have a world to save 50 years from now or 100 years from now. But we have to stop apologizing for love. We have to stop apologizing for the fact that we need a U.S. Department of Children and Youth because our children are suffering and they need us. We need to stop apologizing for the fact that we want reparations for slavery. Why? Because whether you're a country or a person, you can't have the future you want until you clean up the past. And we need to stop apologizing for the fact that we want to actually create a United States Department of Peace because we want to make peace building equally robust with the things that we must do in order to be prepared for the eventuality, if there is an eventuality of war. We need a fundamental pattern disruption of the American political and economic status quo. We need a moral and political and economic revolution in this country. Must be nonviolent and it must be peaceful, but John F. Kennedy said, those who make peaceful revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable. There has to be a revolution first in our hearts. We need to push back against our cynicism. We need to push back against our laziness. We need to push back against our self-absorption. We need to push back against our disengagement from things that really matter. We need to push back against our need to please and to gain approval so much that we will shut down when people make fun of us or people mock us. We'll keep talking and we'll keep going. And we will know that there are companions on our left and there are companions on our right. And there are companions in front of us and companions behind us. And it's just like John Lennon said, you might say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. And we are not the only ones. There are more lovers in this country than there are haters. But haters hate with conviction these days, and hate is hated with conviction, and conviction is a force multiplier. Those of us who love, there are a lot more of us who love than hate, but we have to love with conviction now. We have to say it, and we have to say it again. And if somebody makes fun of you, you just say it again. And you say it again, and if somebody mocks you, you just say it again. And if somebody tries to say all kinds of silly things about you, you just say it again. And then you're going to notice your sisters are saying it too, and your brothers are saying it too, and we're going to be on the march. And the abolitionists just kept saying it, and the suffragettes just kept saying it, and the civil rights workers just kept saying it. It's our turn. Ladies and gentlemen, let's keep saying it. Thank you very, very, very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I love you. Thank you. Thank you very, very much. I love you, Agape. Thank you.